Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you, featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today my guest is Thomas E. Boyce, Ph.D. He is the only applied psychologist, formally trained professional musician and recording artist, author, keynote speaker, university professor, Fortune 100 business consultant in the world. Can you imagine that? Wow, what a job you've got. Now, TED typically trains workers at high-risk operations such as mining, construction, and more. These trainees often include Native Americans, union and non-union employees. And Thomas, you do so much, and I want you to tell our audience all about your job. Let's start with that, okay? So tell us, what does it all mean to you, and how did you get started, and who inspired you?
Well, that's a great question to start off with. The reason that I do the work that I do is I have this passion to improve quality of life, and I figured that there would be no better way to do that than to try to create more positive work experiences for the working class, if you will. And I found my passion for psychology very early on as a young man, and it dovetailed with my equally as strong passion for music. So I was actually a musician before I became a psychologist, and I have been on a mission since I received my Ph.D. degree to combine both the practical applications of psychology with the entertainment value of music to share a message that we can create more positive work experiences if we know why people do what they do, and we create positive work environments for them to behave in. Yeah. And so I teach these principles to leaders in an organization, but I also involve those doing the frontline work so that they can also have more influence and control over their personal circumstances. And when everyone embraces these ideas, it leads to some wonderful results and a happier, healthier workforce.
Yeah. Now, you talk a little bit about being a musician before you became this person who deals with all of these psychological issues. Is there a connection between the two? It does something very much for your soul. It does something for you to kind of be excited by and very, how should I say it, Thomas? Because you're the musician. So what would you say about that?
Well, I believe that it reaches people at an emotional level. And when one starts to understand human behavior, you come to realize very early that a lot of the way that we respond to the world is emotionally. So even those messages that we may be delivering in business are not devoid of emotion, and the challenge is to create positive emotions even around difficult messages so that folks see the future in a way that produces hope and optimism and keeps them doing what they need to do to be successful. And I think that music can play a key role in creating that more positive emotion. It really does transform people, and the extent to which we recognize that and we use that to our advantage, I think we can actually get our messages across to people more effectively.
Yeah. Now, I'm reading a book. It's called Resilience. And Magic Johnson, and everybody knows who Magic Johnson is, the greatest basketball player. He says that the reason he loved this book, Resilience, was that it teaches you how to become stronger, how to bend but not break, how to make the best of a bad situation. Now, I'm sure you've met a lot of people who are negative and they really don't know how to change their lives because they have PTSD. They have all kinds of other problems that caused by war, caused by all these traumas that take place in our society. So when you hear something like what Magic Johnson says, how do you process it? How do you make it understand it?
Well, we have to recognize that while the world may act upon us, events happen sometimes beyond our control, we do have some choice in how we respond to those events. And so for me, resilience is about recognizing that we do have some control over our outcomes, even in situations where we believe that we were not, we did not firsthand create. So it really is focusing on the various responses that we can engage in as a result of some experience. And so resilience comes about when, for example, what we might describe as a personal failure leads us to look for solutions rather than to give up. And I believe that this is learned behavior. So part of what we need to do is help people to recognize that they do have choices, right, to make better choices, and to realize that one particular outcome does not have to be the end. We can take another step. When we're thinking, for example, about being creative, I might find something that is what I might describe as a good answer to a creative problem. If I embrace the attitude that there may also be another good answer, or there might be a next best answer, we start thinking outside of the box, and it really does produce some miraculous things. So for me, that is the key to resilience, is recognizing that we don't have to stop here. We don't have to see a failure as a failure. We can see this an opportunity to learn and improve.
Yeah. Now, why did you decide to work with Native Americans and union and non-union employees? How did you choose that particular group?
Well, it's really as a result of the organizations that actually asked me to help them with particular projects. They happen to have these groups represented as part of their workforce. And so it became very important for me to understand both the cultures of the represented workforce, that is the union workforce, and also in the same and also different circumstances, the cultures of the Native Americans. And my experience has been is that when you embrace tradition, it actually becomes easier to make the changes that may be necessary to produce improvements in some aspect of the business function.
Yeah.
So rather than fighting it, you want to embrace it and find a point of entry in which you can actually produce the change that you have been asked to produce.
Yeah.
And so honoring that history and tradition is huge, and especially where you've got such a history as the Native Americans do, or the sometimes turbulent history of the union environment has occurred in the history of the United States.
So what kind of changes do you see happening in the area of safety and regulations in the U.S.? I mean, now that Trump is president, doesn't he want to eliminate regulations?
Well, I think I think that has probably not yet fully been decided, so time will tell. It looks like we may be moving in that direction, and that may not be a bad thing. Let me explain.
Yeah.
For me, we can over-regulate. People become dependent on the rules, and it ironically can produce a lack of accountability because folks don't take personal control over these circumstances. They're waiting for someone else to do it for them.
Right.
For example, in the mining industry, the reaction to some of the high visibility mine disasters that have occurred primarily in coal mining has been to tighten regulation. And my experience has been that you get a diminishing return when you start doing more of the same thing, and you now start to provide excuses for people not to do things that go beyond the regulation.
Right.
And so I think finding that middle ground is going to be key. That's not to say that safety and other things should not be regulated. I believe there has to be oversight. I do also believe that we have to approach it from more than one perspective. Yep. And to do just more of the same is not always the answer. So maybe if things are deregulated even a little, it will provide some latitude for these operators to do more voluntary things that will actually produce a better result.
Yeah.
The kinds of things that I teach, frankly.
Right. Now, how can an employer get their employees to enjoy work? I mean, now, and be more productive, because if you work for the government or if you work for a huge bureaucracy, it doesn't sound, or I haven't seen these people be productive. Let me give you an idea or an experience that I had. Let me tell you about an experience that I had, Thomas. When I went into a government office, I asked them for a form, and the woman said to me, "You got to stand online." There must have been about 50 people sitting there that I had to wait for a form. And I saw the form right in back of her. And I went back to her and I said, "Can't you just give me the form?" And her answer was, "No, you got to stand online." So if you work for the government, what is your incentive to be productive?
That is the proverbial $10,000 question, as they say. Government work is different than private work. And in the end, there is a job security that really prevents, I would say, optimal performance, especially when that performance is managed primarily through punitive consequences for poor performance. The ultimate punishment being you lose your job. That is not likely to happen in most government situations. I believe that some employees recognize and take advantage of that. I don't believe that they set out in their careers to do that, but that over the course of time they have learned that the path of least resistance is okay and that their job security remains. Now, here's the solution.
Okay.
And I think that this is also true of private industry, is that we need to create work environments where positive behaviors, that is, things that are helpful to our customers or our clients, things that are helpful to our business, things that are helpful to each other, actually produce some form of recognition. And that doesn't mean paid incentives or trinkets or any of these other things that have become kind of fad. It means those in positions of authority recognizing or looking for those behaviors, and when they see them, taking the time to simply say, "Thank you, I appreciate that." When we do those kinds of things, it helps us to be more successful in what we've been asked to do. It creates a more positive work environment. I hope that you will continue doing that in the future. And so, I'm sorry. One more thing. We've overcomplicated, I think, managing and leading employees, and part of this has been the penchant to create rules, regulations, and policies that threaten reprimands or punitive consequences for poor performance, and doing that at the expense of just giving a simple thank you or appreciation for good performance.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is the simplest change that people can make.
Yeah, that's I agree with you on that, because I know that when I used to work for several different TV stations and various other jobs that I had, I felt that all I needed was a little bit of like, Susan, you're doing a good job, or Susan, I like your work, or Susan, you're being very productive and I appreciate it. If you don't get that kind of response, you feel like nothing. You feel very, very uncomfortable and very negative. Now, how has that changed? Because before, and when I say before, I'm talking about maybe 50 years ago, it was a different kind of workplace. So is there a change, or is there going to be a change in the way people work and the way that bosses treat their workers?
I believe there's going to have to be a change. And this is actually a nice extension of the conversation we were just having about showing appreciation. Today's younger generation, especially those that don't know a world without computers, really expect a lot of feedback. They get them from their electronic devices. Every input with your, every keystroke produces some kind of outcome. And the need for them to know where they stand, I believe, has increased relative to earlier generations. And so we're going to have to design work systems that have feedback built into them. We're going to have to develop leaders that are not afraid to go out and get their eyes on what people are doing and to take that step to provide that appreciation to those that are doing a good job. And we're going to have to prepare to develop the skills of these younger employees so that they can keep interested in the work that they're doing. Attention spans have shortened, and interest in the work has decreased, and so we have to keep things really novel and fresh. And in the failure to do that is going to cause us to lose good employees because they're going to be looking for those experiences in another workplace.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your book.
Okay.
Tell our audience a little bit about your book and why you wrote it and why it's so important for people to access it.
The Psychology of Leadership book that I wrote was really intended to provide a lot of information in a small package, recognizing that folks have very little time and they will set aside things such as reading a leadership book in favor of maybe catering to a crisis that has occurred at the workplace. I wanted to give them something that they could actually digest in short bits and pieces and still make a difference in the working lives of those that they happen to manage or lead. So the book is actually written in two parts. We first talk a little bit about effective leadership communication and what's involved in creating a work culture where you're getting good two-way communication. So it's not just about talking at somebody, but it's about talking with someone, which includes being a good listener and creating an environment where those that are working for you want to share information. We are in positions of power when we make decisions based on good information rather than speculating about what's going on. And my experience has been those that are working in a system are the best source of that information if we allow them to be. They are experts in what they do. The second part of the book is what we call our evidence-based leadership model. And evidence-based leadership works on the basic assumption that the tangible outcomes we produce in our business, often referred to as key performance indicators or KPIs. So this may be things related to, safety, environmental protection, quality, or even profitability or productivity. That leaders produce these outcomes through other people. And so we, at a fundamental level, need to understand what actions or behaviors we need those folks to be doing more of in order for us to hit those numbers that maybe the people that we answer to have asked us to produce.
Right.
And to apply some of these principles that we have talked about generally to be better at leading the employees to do more of those behaviors, and also empowering those employees to assist one another. So we're trying to build a community of folks that actually support the work that we have been asked to do.
Is this book a book that anybody can read? Is it for laymen, or is it for somebody in the industry that you work in? I mean, who does it really apply to? Can young people read about it? Can older people? Who does it affect?
Absolutely anybody can read this book. It has been written with that in mind. And so whereas I think my grand vision would be able to get this book into the hands of our President-elect Donald Trump, because I think he could benefit from it. I believe that somebody who has just got an aspiration to become a supervisor or a manager could benefit from this book. And so it has been written with that idea in mind. We've created a very broad stroke, if you will, that has application to anyone in a leadership role, formal or informal,
right,
for that matter.
Okay, so you're saying that anybody can read the book. Now, how do they get it? Is it online? Can they buy it in a bookstore? How do they get it?
Right now, we've got it available online. The website is thepsychologyofleadership.com, and it is available for sale through that website. Now, what's interesting is we are currently selling the book in bundles of 20 for a discounted rate.
Oh.
And our motivation for doing that rather than selling single copies is that we believe that this information works best when it is shared. So I would absolutely love someone who is in a management position, who maybe has other supervisors or managers reporting to them, to consider purchasing a bundle of these books and then distributing them to others who are also leaders in that organization, and having conversations about what it is that they learn. That will make it more likely for them to apply the information that we're providing to make the differences that I think that it can in their business.
Well, it sounds great. It sounds like it's a very, very productive book that can really change the lives of people in the workforce. So my guest today has been Thomas E. Boyce, Ph.D., and he's an applied psychologist, and he's formally trained to be a professional musician, and isn't that a wonderful thing? So I want to thank you, Thomas Boyce, for being on the Susan Brender Show. It's been a great show, and I appreciate you.
Well, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun, and I hope that the information we discussed will be of interest and of use to your audience.
Thank you for listening to the Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.